Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast.
Bob Turner served 9 years in the RAF, having trained as ground crew on air communications electronics. He worked at 51 Squadron on what were then 3 top-secret aircraft, versions of the Nimrod, the R1, which functioned as an electronic intelligence gatherer. With a crew of 22 and an aircraft which comprised 70% of electronic equipment, the R1 was one of the most complex aircraft of its kind in the RAF. It was always shrouded in secrecy. Assigned armed guards whenever it returned to Woodford for modifications. Rob had some fascinating stories, gleaned from his flight crew colleagues, of accidental incursions into Soviet naval exercises, of unconventional runway lighting used during the Falklands War, and explaining why the R1 wasn't represented at the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. But he started off by telling us a little bit about his entry into the RAF.
Okay, I joined the RAF in 1975, signed up for 9 years, so I was in from 1975 to 84. My choice within the Royal Air Force was then to be ground crew working on the electronics on aircraft, whichever aircraft, didn't matter, wherever I would get posted to or sent. So my choice specifically on electronics, there was 3 trades at the time. There was air communications, air radar and navigation systems, and I chose air communication systems. So it was at the time it was a 14-month training program starting the basics of electronics, either from transistors or even with valves at the time as well, given the antique nature of some of the equipment that was on board the planes. And at the completion of that, in November 76, I was then posted to, in this case, to RAF Whitton, to 51 Squadron, to work on the and look after and maintain the electronic systems on board the aircraft.
Okay. And then there was a particular project that you worked on, wasn't there, that you were saying earlier you'd have to shoot me if you told me about it a while back, but it was okay now because it was beyond the official secret side, which is the 3 R1 aircraft.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about the background to that.
The 51 Squadron had developed over the years to become a specialist in electronic intelligence and gathering. And its role and function was to fly along the Soviet border and identify radar stations and what the radar signatures were in terms of pulse width, pulse repetition frequency and scanning ranges, what bands they were working in, and also to listen to any voice communications. And on that, they carried linguists on board as well. So consequently, because of the amount of people on board the plane, whereas a conventional maritime reconnaissance might have anything from 10 to 14 people on board, depending, the Nimrod R1 had about 22 people on board.
Were there any particular periods when you were working on the R1 that are worth talking about?
Normally, it would the planes would fly from Whitton, and they would fly along from the border on the Baltic, and then probably down the German border to as far as Switzerland. But then occasionally, about 2-3 times a year, would fly out to Cyprus and operate from there. So he's circle the Soviet Union border there, and then occasionally used to go to Tehran, and operate from there to cover across the Black Sea. Interesting at times. One of the occasions when in the Comets at times, so it was before I arrived on the squadron, but I said it was one of the planes that actually was quite happily going along the Black Sea, and they wondered why suddenly all these Soviet aircraft were flying all around them, looking rather angry, and it seems they blundered into a Soviet naval exercise. so they had to extricate themselves very quickly. As history repeats itself, at this moment in time, 51 Squadron is now operating from Bulgaria, and it's doing routine surveillance in support of Ukraine. And it's been intercepted twice by the Russian Air Force, of which one occasion they fired a partially fueled missile at it as well. And it's escorted by 2 Typhoon fighters. So the role and function still remains the same. The aircraft have changed. It's now the RC-135 rivet joint aircraft. But basically, it's still the same job.
Yeah, and we were talking a bit earlier on, and you mentioned the R1s coming back here for particular modifications. I think that was following things that emerged from the Falklands War. Tell us a little bit about what those modifications were.
By that time, I'd left the squadron, but I kept in touch with a lot of guys. But yes, the Nimrods, all Nimrods were to be upgraded to have in-flight refueling capability, and they were transferred up to Woodford for the modification. And I believe that, because of their nature, that any of the British Aerospace employees that went on the airplane were very, very selected, and at all times the plane was under armed guard. You
mentioned also a story about Chile and the Falklands War. Tell us a bit about that and what happened there.
Yeah. It's been written in a book by somebody about the Falklands War anyway, so I can have, if you know, it's beyond the statute of the Official Secrets Act now, so it's out in the public domain. But basically, short of it is, one of the planes operated from an island off the coast of Chile, and it used to fly along the Chilean-Argentine border, or perhaps round the Cape Horn, and then to along the coast well off Argentina, again to detect radar systems and also any voice and intelligence systems as well. The island, I was scheduled to have been on that trip, but however, I was getting married that year, and so I was told, you're not going. I thought, no, okay, right. So the other guys went off there, and they're on this particular island off the coast of Chile, which wasn't really set up for night flying because it didn't have any lights on the runways or parking areas at all. So this compounded the fact that the runway had a slope on it either end, so there's like basically a hump in the middle of the runway. And so when the plane was taking off in the dark, 2 of the guys had to go up the runway and sit on the top of this hump, if you like, either side of the runway with torches, so the Nimrod could take off between them. Good flying, eh?
Yeah. If people wanted to find out a bit more about the R1s, you mentioned this article, which was in Air International, wasn't it? And there's a fantastic drawing in the middle there, isn't there, of the aircraft. What strikes you, as you've already mentioned, was just were 22 crew members, were you saying, around that?
The article itself is in, I should get copyright on this, Air International, published in July 2001, and the feature is BAE Nimrod R1 with a cutaway drawing as what's inside.
Yeah.
So in trying to describe this, it shows you the airplane as I knew it then, with all the required systems on it. And then when you have a look at this, you can see that basically the flight crew, the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and the flight engineer sit right at the very, very front. And then basically looking at what's effectively 70% of the rest of the airplane is full of electronics equipment. And this made it one of the most complex electronic aircraft in the RAF. Yes, there was the AWACS as well, but that was a single system with a lot of repeat consoles and desks, whereas this was a whole multitude and arrangement of them. And apart from the actual consoles and desks as well, you can just about make out the number of surveillance aerials on the outside of the aircraft, and underneath them what used to be the bomb bays mounted underneath as well. They were all over the place. There's all sorts of stuff.
So what were some of those, you talked about a range of functions. What were those different functions? Give examples.
The functionality was to monitor all the radar bands, KJ, X, I think it might be an S band as well. To those in the know, whatever it was, it's in the gigahertz range anyway. But also anything voice communication wise from HF up to VHF, which was 20 megahertz up to at least about 300 megahertz. So any voice communication system that was used at the time, still is now. You could listen in. So like listening to the police station, police radio frequencies or ambulance frequencies, you name it.
And you've got people with the relevant languages then to help with that.
Yeah, because it did depend on when it flies. So principally it was Russian, but it could have been anywhere else on the globe as well.
And how long could that aircraft keep flying? What would be a typical sort
It was typically about an 8-hour flight.
8-hour flight?
Well, typically until, but then it depended upon, obviously, with the advent of in-flight refueling, then its mission could extend, but they wouldn't be working all the time. So it's a case of taking time to get out to be on the station and then fly its prescribed track. That's when they'll all be busy then, and then whatever time it took to get back.
Yeah. Did it work really well?
As far as I know, it did. So that being ground crew, I never actually flew on it, but in talking to the guys, there was they're perfectly happy with it. As an example, at the Avro Museum, one of the BAE pilots who used to fly or test fly the Nimrods from here visited, and on the Nimrod section we got there, he was immediately straight back into the cockpit and wanted to take off. A bit difficult, he hasn't got any wings on it, but no, he said it was a lovely airplane to fly and he thoroughly enjoyed it and he was perfectly happy with it. Yes, it was old technology, it was based on a Comet, but he was perfectly happy with flying and he thought it was a wonderful plane to fly.
So how long did you work then on the R1s, and was that right to the end of your RAF career? Or?
Yeah, it's from 76 to 84.
And that was all down in Cambridgeshire, yeah.
Given that everybody thinks of Nimrods flying either from St Morgan or Kinloss, or at one time they were based out in Malta as well. But no, these were 3 special ones that were kept pretty secret. To give an example of that, when it was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 1977, and to be held at what was then RAF Finley, every squadron in the RAF had an airplane there lined up on the airfield there, apart from 51 Squadron. That was it. But set the other squadron flag there and sort of stand there.
So it was still that secret.
Yes.
Yeah. But as you were saying, similar work needed today and being
it still goes on.
Done by a different aircraft, but still very, very much needed. Yeah. On another episode, it would be good to talk about a whole other aspect of your career, which is working at Imperial War Museum, isn't it, at Duxford? How did you make the transition? Was it a natural transition from RAF, or was it something you were always interested in? How it came about, just to sort of whet people's appetite for.
But living near Cambridge, I was about half an hour from Duxford. It took a while. It was a case of after leaving the RAF. Was working in various other companies and industries at the time. And it was a case of like getting aviation and stuff out of my system, if you like. That's about 10 years later, went to an air display at Duxford and I thought, well, I'd like to get involved with doing this. Well, the restoration work was required, so it was a case of getting back involved in that. So it was a case of making that choice of having a hobby, something to do. So life didn't just consist of work and family. Important as they are, but it's just to have something else to do. There's divers don't want to go off and play golf, and so what I'll do, find something to do as well. So that's where the involvement was there, working on restoring the static aircraft, not the flying ones, the static aircraft in the Imperial War Museum collection. That was for the next 25 years.
All that experience you had obviously was enormously transferable, wasn't it?
Not really. Just being familiar with aircraft, yes, and handling of aircraft, yes. But because I dealt with electronics, it's not too much of a use on aircraft. I suppose don't have any power on.
Yeah.
But it's just being familiar with that kind of environment. So again, we're working with other guys who were familiar with that. So just working with them. A lot of the work was involved with just getting rid of the grease and oil and taking the paint off, and then letting the other guys get on with the actual any metal work required. But it's still having a familiarity with an aeroplane and what the technology of it is.
You knew your way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Well, listen, Bob, that's great. And as I say, another time it would be really good to hear about all your work at Duxford and how that particular museum, developed, which it must have done enormously, and all the time that you worked there. That would be an interesting story to hear as well. But in the meantime, thank you ever so much for talking to us.
Great, it's a pleasure.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.